Dr. Sharif Abdullah offers a unique, hopeful, and visionary perspective on the persistent challenges of our time. His perspective is shaped by his urban upbringing of poverty and violence, his Ivy League education, and his work with impacted communities in America and in 45 countries around the world. His spiritual outlook is rooted in the consciousness of dozens of religions, faith traditions, and spiritual practices. Sharif offers this unique viewpoint, helping us chart a course that explains where we've been, where we are now, and how we get to a positive future that works for all living beings.
Hello, Sharif here. And today we're going to talk about part 2 of this series I'm doing on African Americans and reparations. Last time we talked about the issue of managed consciousness and to show how the consciousness of all Americans, including those of us who are watching this right now, has been managed around the issue of World War II and the dropping of the atomic bombs on the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And how profound that management was and still is, what we've believed about the issue, the things that we understand about the issue, the things that we were allowed to understand about the issue, has remained remarkably consistent over time. Similarly, the consciousness of Americans, Black and white, have been managed by around this issue of slavery and the aftermath of slavery, the period of time that we don't even have a name for. It goes by the euphemism of Jim Crow. It goes by the general description, the description of discrimination. What I call the American apartheid system. And I'm trying to tease apart, just like our consciousness has been managed around the issue of the atomic war and the horror that we created. Our consciousness has been managed around the issue of slavery, the apartheid system, and that horror that we created and have to take responsibility for. So there's some factors in how this the situation got managed. What we've been allowed to think about slavery is, first of all, don't think about it. Something happened way in the past, it wasn't all that good, so let's not think about it. If we thought about it at all, if we even allowed ourselves to think about slavery having happened at all, there are many, many people in this country that don't acknowledge that slavery played a factor in the country at all. If you acknowledge that it existed, the idea was that it was not particularly bad. There were some, brutal slave masters that whipped their slaves too much, and that wasn't really good, but it was generally benign. People worked and they just didn't get a paycheck. That's the idea behind how we see slavery. It's something that happened in the South, cotton fields and plantations, and we don't have any relationship to that. It's something that we fought a war over, that the Civil War was to free the slaves. That's the purpose of the Civil War, was to free the slaves. And after we freed the slaves, we gave some special programs and benefits to the former slaves. And everything's okay now. And we know everything is okay because those former slaves, the descendants of those former slaves, can now become millionaires, they can run companies, they can become president of the United States. Everything must be okay. Now, that's the managed consciousness. That's what you were taught in school, regardless of whether you're black or white. And I remember we took over Camden High School twice in order to force them to teach us Black history, to teach us something other than the stuff that you learned by the version of slavery you learned by watching Walt Disney's Song of the South, where the slaves were walking down the street singing and bluebirds were flying all around them. It looked like a good time to me. I can actually still remember, even once we got the right to teach ourselves our own history, nobody knew what to teach. And my history teacher in high school, Thomas Foster, I would work with him. I go to his house with the books that I found on Black history and teach him Black history that he could then go the next week and teach the other students at the school. And I remember I would remember walking to his house thinking, there's something wrong with this picture of me going to teach my teacher. But that's how embedded this managed consciousness was. We didn't even know our own history. We didn't know the significance of our own history. I believe that that's still true today. I believe that although it's taught and even encouraged in our school systems, and we have things like Black History Month, where we get to talk about Black history, and you've got these, and I have to say, fairly well done documentaries that show up on PBS once a year to talk about our history, that the old story, the managed consciousness story, is still sticking around. I've talked to you about consciousness. I've talked to you about how if consciousness doesn't change, nothing else changes. If consciousness changes, then your culture can change. If your culture changes, then your laws, your regulations, the things that you do, all that stuff can change. The behavior can change. Consciousness comes first, then culture, then behavior. What we're doing with this reparations deal is doing it exactly the wrong way, exactly opposite. We don't want to change our consciousness. We just want the money. How many people, how many Black people, let's assume that I wave my cheap plastic pencil and can get reparations passed today. And every Black family gets $10 million, which is probably what 40 acres and a mule would be valued at today. How quickly would we hand all $10 million over to the folks that are making the latest McMansion, the folks that the folks who make the big screen TVs, the folks that make, the Cadillac Escalade or the Lincoln Navigator or the biggest car, biggest SUV you can get your hands on? How quickly would we pour that right down the tubes? Because all it looks like to us is a whole bunch of money and I can watch television, so I'm told what to spend the money on. How many of us would use this as an opportunity to change our consciousness? I would argue that without the groundwork being laid, not nearly enough. And if I could wave my cheap plastic pencil and do reparations immediately, what would that do in the white community? You'd have a whole bunch of folks who who also don't understand the issues, who also don't get what reparations would be about. Many of them struggling, many of them having difficulties in their own lives. Poverty is not the purview of Black people, it's the purview of everybody in America. And they would be angry. I know I would be angry if this group gets something and I don't get it. Wait, this group gets my money. Congress takes it from me and gives it to them. I'd be angry if with the current consciousness. I'd be angry enough at Congress to want to get a gun and storm the place. I don't condone the anger, but I understand it because no one is talking to these guys. No one is explaining anything to them. No one has made any attempt. No one has and no one is making any attempt to explain to them American history. We think that they are the problem when they're the victim of the problem. All of us are the victim of the problem. All of us are not only managing our consciousness, the consciousness of each other. We're allowing ourselves to be managed by not engaging in deep thought, not engaging in deep soul searching, not working to root out of my own heart any and all of the vestiges of slavery. That's our job. For white people, not rooting out of their own hearts any and all vestiges of being the slave master. I think one of the most profound things that Abraham Lincoln said is something that very, very few people understand. He made a statement. He said that he was against slavery. And he said the reason why was because I would not be a slave. I would not be a slave master. Now, we heard that and said, oh, he said something kind of weird, but yeah, he's against slavery. The reason he was against slavery was not because he was he had this great and abiding love for Black people. There was a lot in his speeches and writings that said he did not. What he was saying was the value of slavery. If you put that on me, I wouldn't go for it. So therefore, I'm not going to take the benefit of it. Because of that value that he held, he thought that that was important enough to do away with the institution as a whole. How many of us hold our values that tightly? How many of us recognize that if the tables were ever turned, I would do the right thing, even though Nobody's going to see me do it, even though it would be easy to go along with the program. Just go along with stuff. But our job is not to be for things to be easy. Our job is not to have to go along with programs here. Our job is to root out of our consciousness, out of our minds and out of our hearts, a system that has existed for hundreds and hundreds of years. As long as that system lies in the hearts of even one Black person, our work is not done. And in this environment that we've got right now, our work hasn't even started. We could wind up waving the cheap pink pencil and getting an amount of money, wasting it immediately, and 40 years later we'll come right back and do this again. Or I would suggest to you that we've got a tougher road to go. And it's time for us to take that tougher road. It's time for us to get ourselves involved in that tougher way to go, so that this literally becomes the last generation that has to deal with this. How do we do that? Talk about that next time. Thank you. Before I go, one more appeal to you to, if you appreciate the series, if you appreciate this video, like it. It matters when people are looking at your scores. Subscribe and donate something. The Patreon button is below. For those of you who are internet challenged, write a check and send it. This stuff matters. It matters to get this out in the world. It's not free. Please support it. Thank you.
You are invited to participate in the discussions and activities that will define a positive future for all. We are at the cusp of the expansion of our human consciousness beyond the limitations of our past. Together, we can envision a world that embraces our human potential. Together, we can create a world that can truly work for all living beings.